Good morning, everybody. I hope this is working and you can hear me fine. Thank you all for coming in person to this event. We have a much larger audience that is following us online. I'm told that we have over 300 people who registered for this event. A lot of them are from outside the United States, in Europe and the Middle East and North Africa. We are grateful for the Honorable Anne Witkowsky, the Assistant Secretary of State, for the new policy, the Stabilization and Conflict Bureau at the State Department, being with us. We have also the American Ambassador to Libya, Richard Norland, to speak about the specifics that relate to Libya, because this policy is more of a larger policy that includes multiple countries that the United States has announced in terms of engaging around the world, especially many of these countries are in Africa, to establish stability. Libya is one of those countries, so the ambassador will speak specifically about Libya. The Assistant Secretary will give us a sense of the overall policy, what it means, what is the intention, what are the tools that the United States is going to use to achieve these goals. All of the details that we need to understand about this. We have also Andrew with us, my colleague from the Stimson Center, who is an expert on this topic. He worked in the same bureau before he joined the Stimson as a senior fellow. He will be the discussant. We only have an hour, so we don't have a lot of time to waste. So I'm going to turn to you, Anne, to speak, and then we'll turn to Richard, then to Andrew as a discussant, and then we'll open this to discussion with everybody.
Great.
Please.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone here and to those of you joining us online as well. I'd like to thank Johns Hopkins New North Africa Initiative for the invitation to speak today, and the Stimson Center for hosting us. Ambassador Norland and I have had the pleasure of speaking with you about the innovative bipartisan Global Fragility Act and its associated U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. The ambassador and I have known one another and worked together for over a long period of time, and it's really a pleasure to share the stage with him. As well as with Andrew Hyde, we've also known one another for many years, and equally a pleasure. Along with our friends and allies and the wider international community, we're facing destabilizing transnational challenges which disrupt ways of life, economies, and whole societies. Democratic governance and respect for human rights are increasingly under threat as violent extremists and practitioners of oppression assert their authoritarian will through coercion and violence. To address these challenges, the United States is committed to strengthening global resilience, fostering democratic renewal, and promoting peaceful, self-reliant countries that can be strong economic and security partners. The U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability is a long-term, groundbreaking initiative to redefine how the United States works to prevent violence and advance stability in areas vulnerable to conflict. The strategy and our 10-year plans to implement it in 4 countries and 1 region, Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, Papua New Guinea, and coastal West Africa, which includes in that region Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Togo, seek to break the costly cycle of instability and promote peace. The strategy focuses on 4 goals: prevention, stabilization, partnerships, and management, and emphasizes an integrated whole-of-government approach to harnessing the full range of U.S. tools across the diplomatic, development, and defense sectors to achieve those goals. As mandated by the Global Fragility Act, the Department of State leads the execution of the whole-of-government strategy. Working closely with in-country partners, businesses, and civil society organizations at the national and local levels, we aim to deploy all the tools at our disposal to support the strategy through our embassies overseas and our substantive and technical experts here in Washington, emphasizing integrated and intentional planning and monitoring, evaluation, and learning across the plans. In March, when President Biden transmitted the 10-year plans to Congress, He noted they, quote, represent a meaningful long-term commitment by the United States to building the political and economic resilience of partner societies by making strategic investments in prevention to mitigate the underlying vulnerabilities that can lead to conflict and violence and are critical to achieving lasting peace. And I would add that in developing the plans, U.S. government interagency teams conducted broad-ranging consultations with national and local leaders, including women, youth, and civil society members. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the discussion today. Now I'd like to touch briefly on each of these approaches before delving a little more deeply into an overview of the Libya approach. In coastal West Africa, we will work with partners at all levels to prevent the destabilizing expansion of terrorism and violent extremism. We are pursuing an integrated approach to governance and security in support of African-led initiatives and aligning our efforts with national governments' plans, which take a holistic approach to mitigating conflict risks and vulnerabilities and strengthening social cohesion. In Haiti, we will foster stabilization in communities affected by violence, while over time systematically addressing the underlying drivers of conflict and mitigating the effect of climate shocks. We will continue consultations with a broad range of Haitian stakeholders, as we have begun, to support locally driven peace and stability initiatives. In Mozambique, we will support the national government's plans to promote reconciliation, inclusive and sustainable development, and resilience in historically marginalized and conflict-affected areas. This includes efforts to counter vulnerabilities to terrorism, bolster recovery from its negative effects, and address the root causes of instability in the north. We aim to help the government and local partners foster pathways for inclusive economic growth to increase employment, especially among young Mozambicans. In Papua New Guinea, we will seek to strengthen communities' capacity to prevent and respond to chronic violence and conflict, support inclusive, sustainable, and equitable economic growth, improve justice systems, and professionalize the security forces. Across these goals, we will help Papua New Guinean partners advance gender equity and equality, prevent and respond to gender-based violence, and elevate women peace builders. Now, Libya is a prime location to pilot our new approach to conflict prevention and stabilization because the active conflict there has transitioned to a political dispute. And all indicators suggest Libya's political transition and societal reconciliation will require a patient, long-term approach that is envisioned under the strategy. In Libya, the United States is pursuing a flexible, adaptive approach focused on community-level programs that can be scaled up as opportunities arise. Our plan for Libya is focused on achieving our top U.S. priority there, an elected national government able to govern and maintain security throughout the country. This effort comes at an important time in our relationship with Libya. Given the political impasse on national elections, it might be tempting for us to take a back seat until Libyan stakeholders forge a new way forward. However, we've seen from the past that moments like this are precisely when we must deepen our engagement. Political stability and security are threatened by competitors and adversaries, not only in Libya, but also in the broader region. Initiatives include efforts to strengthen subnational capacity to promote political consensus building, economic development activities, and violence reduction projects that aim to reestablish access to security, justice, accountability, and demobilization and reintegration efforts. The initial focus of our plans will be southern Libya. We have been collaborating with UN agencies and like-minded partners, including the EU and European diplomatic missions, to set the conditions for positive change in the south. We find this helpful to avoid duplication of effort, fill gaps, and broaden our common understanding of local needs. Our approach initially focuses on southern Libya for two reasons. First, it's a region that's been historically neglected and marginalized. Incorporating local stakeholders can reinforce national level reconciliation. Second, instability and security vacuums in southern Libya have had ripple effects throughout the Sahel and provide an enabling environment for malign actors. Statistics from the Global Terrorism Index of the Institute in Peace show that the Sahel region now accounts for 43% of the world's terrorism deaths, which is more than South Asia and the Middle East and North Africa combined. And that percentage is rising. So we see the benefits of improved stability in southern Libya for the country and for the wider region as well. We will invest in preparing Libya to effectively conduct disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration efforts at the national and community level and partner with civil society to create enabling conditions for successful implementation. U.S. programming will support local community reconciliation efforts, as well as national reconciliation efforts led by the Libyan Presidential Council and the Libyan National Planning Council. The African Union and the UN support mission in Libya are also seeking to facilitate this effort. Libyan and European interlocutors have told us that the strategy's 10-year timeframe signaled to them the United States has re-engaged and recommitted to Libya. Partners have noted the Global Fragility Act is helping to signal to malign actors like Russia that the United States will not allow Libya to be a void they can exploit. Let me share a couple of areas of real progress that we are making in Libya. In the southern city of Marzouk, we've advanced reconciliation. In 2019, Marzouk, the so-called gateway to the Sahel, witnessed widespread violence between the city's Tebu and Ahali communities, which destroyed most of the city and forced several thousand, 4,000 Ahali families to flee. USAID facilitated discussions between Tebu and Ahali leaders, culminating in the signing of a roadmap for peace and reconciliation. The momentum we've created has brought together the community, the Libyan National Army, and the Government of National Unity to help Marzouk shed its legacy of violence. Another initiative, a success, the Youth and Energy Dialogues, focuses on sustainable community-driven solutions in Libya's south. The program has brought together community members, civil society organizations, youth, relevant authorities, and Libyan oil sector representatives to discuss resource-related issues spanning conflict in these communities. From this has come plans for the creation of a new oil refinery to provide cooking gas to communities where fuel has been almost non-existent, in addition to the establishment of a health clinic that will be open to employees and local residents at low cost. We're trying to address the key drivers of militarization and the illicit economy by promoting alternative opportunities, particularly among youth and women, and by helping activists launch awareness, raising campaigns against the dangers of militias as well. For example, USAID is supporting vocational training for youth by providing at-risk communities with the skills necessary to compete in the labor market, creating a viable alternative to joining militias. Our diplomatic mission to Libya continues to leverage the US government's convening power to promote constructive internal dialogues by engaging a diverse group of Libyan stakeholders and actors. In a recent roundtable discussion with Libyan think tanks, we note the significance that it was the first time two rival policy and research institutions, the National Planning Council and the National Economic and Sustainable Development Board, have come together. We know we must and we will adapt our approach over time through ongoing consultations, and that is a core tenet of the work that we're doing under the US strategy. We know we cannot assess our program's impact without evidence. We are focusing on improving our monitoring, evaluation, and learning capabilities. And with those, we will regularly review our approach as we learn from implementation and as on-the-ground circumstances evolve. We'll continue to seek out and elevate local voices and solutions to prevent violence and foster peace. The US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability represents a significant US investment and will support our partners' progress toward peace and resilience. Tailored approaches aim to address the unique challenges and opportunities of the local and regional context. These innovative and groundbreaking plans are a unique opportunity to collaborate across boundaries of many kinds to assist our partners, including in Libya, in creating more peaceful and prosperous futures. I look forward to your questions and our discussion this morning, and thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It's the most coherent presentation I've heard of this new initiative and bipartisan resolution law. Anyway, Richard, do you want to jump in on the Libya specific issue?
Happy to do that. And first, let me just say I appreciate being the opportunity to have an event associated with SAIS, because thanks to the State Department, a number of years ago had a chance to do the 1-year MIPP program at SAIS after I just come back from Moscow, USSR, and so it gave me a chance to put that experience in some context. And
after you leave your official position, come back as a senior fellow.
So no, it's a pleasure to be here, and Anne, I think, has just done an excellent job of outlining how this new strategy for to prevent conflict and promote stability, it's timely and relevant for Libya. And what I want to do is amplify on that, particularly in response to the questions that you might have. But before doing that, I thought I'd use my few minutes here to just amplify or highlight two issues that, from my perspective as ambassador through last year and now as special envoy, I think are particularly worth highlighting. And the first of these has to do with the political context. The fact is, as Anne noted, Libya has moved from outright military confrontation now to a period of fragile political engagement, facilitated by the UN Special Representative for the Secretary General, Abdullah Batili. Libya's political institutions need to be reunited and they need to be re-legitimized. Elections, in our view, are the key to doing this. Everyone in Libya knows this, but getting the key political actors to agree is hard work, given a huge level of distrust on each side. What we learned from the failed attempt to hold elections in 2021 is that it's not enough to set a date for elections as sort of a forcing event and expect the process to unfold smoothly from there. What everybody's looking for are successful elections, where key actors agree on what sort of caretaker government can be trusted to lead the country to fair elections, who will be allowed to run among many controversial candidates, and most importantly, whether everybody will agree to accept the results. That's a huge challenge, but it must be met in the weeks and months to come, because some think the status quo is sustainable. But I think in our view, with closer reflection, it's clear that the divisions in the country are only going to deepen if they're not addressed head on. Bad elections could be destabilizing, but so could no elections. The new Global Fragility Act strategy framework tells Libyans that the United States is committed to supporting the joint Libyan international effort to help SRSG Batili facilitate agreement on a credible roadmap to elections as soon as possible. Its initial focus on the southern region of the country, the so-called Fezzan, and on reconciliation, as in Mourzouk, as Anne mentioned, is intended to take advantage of the South's role as a sort of political fulcrum between the two more populous and powerful parts of the country, and also as a kind of a model or a pilot for what the rest of the country needs to do. And I'm convinced that the GFA and this strategy are going to provide the kind of framework that will allow for nimble, targeted engagement with actors at all levels that will advance the progress towards elections. The second point I wanted to highlight is a kind of a practical one. We realize that to be fully effective in implementing this strategy, the United States needs a persistent diplomatic presence on the ground, leading to the reopening of our embassy in Tripoli as soon as possible. You may not know it, but right now, our embassy to Libya, called the Libya External Office, is based in Tunis, next door, for ongoing security reasons. And the diplomatic presence we have in Tripoli right now is accomplished through periodic trips where we fly in from Tunis. We were lucky that when, of all the bad things that happened as a result of the pullout of Afghanistan, we did get a plane belonging to the State Department's Narcotics Bureau, and that plane is based in Malta and provides us with the travel support we need to get in once or twice a month. When I started in the job back in 2019, we had not had a diplomat in Tripoli in 5 years. Since then, we graduated to day trips, and now to longer stays of a few days at a time. But we're very conscious that other countries are opening up their embassies in Tripoli, and the current model is going to have to be upgraded, which involves addressing risk and addressing cost. So it's not just something that's done like that. Given the sensitive history of what happened to our diplomats in Benghazi in 2012, I think we're all going to have to be ready to accept the degree of risk in increasing our presence, but it has to be done prudently. And again, the challenge we face is the need to be on the ground, engage with Libyans day in and day out at this exact current time, but to do so in a way that isn't going to create another, disaster like what happened before. Why is it so important to do this? Well, how does Libya really matter to us in the scheme of things? Look, Libya lies at the strategic crossroads between Europe, the Middle East, Mediterranean, Africa. It's along the approaches to the Suez Canal. It has enormous reserves of oil and gas and huge potential for solar energy. And its people are ready and eager to dispel the legacy of the brutal Gaddafi era and embrace democratic change. Indeed, I actually believe Libya has the potential to be maybe a bit of a success story in the region, in a region that's still trying to define what the Arab Spring was meant to accomplish. Unlike some of the other states in the region, fighting in Libya has largely stopped. There is a fragile political process underway, and the country is benefiting from unprecedented oil wealth. Of course, the distribution of that wealth is a potentially destabilizing factor. And one of the things we're very focused on is how to help the Libyans come up with a mechanism to manage oil revenue distribution, at least in the short term, until they get a government in place, a unified government. But I really believe that with a little luck and a push from programs like this strategy, Libya could stand out for its progress along the path to democratic stability. So I'll stop there and
thank you very much.
Look forward to questions.
And for transparency reasons, I'm a Libyan American, so I have a personal stake in this. And I admire your optimism, Richard, and I hope the luck comes along, because that would be really a good thing to have. Andrew, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And Richard, thank you. Really excellent comments. And I join with Afet in saying very, very clear and very, very helpful. This is clearly an impressive strategy that you've taken on through the Global Fragility Act, and I can only picture how challenging it is to think about implementing it. It's important, I think, that this approach is both sustainable and holistic, and I think we've heard some good examples of that today. And it's impressive, I think, that the U.S. government has picked a sort of range of countries to target in this, to work with, and a region as well. I think there's a couple of things here that really kind of jumped out at me hearing about this and reading about this. One on the aspect, Anne, you mentioned about the work you're doing at CSO, how you're really mainstreaming this Global Fragility Act into U.S. foreign policy. I think that's so critically important to its success and to its sustainability. And I think in doing that, you're also bringing to bear a lot of lessons that we've learned, hard lessons, tough lessons over the last couple of decades in Iraq, Afghanistan, but also in the work of the CSO Bureau in its 10 years of existence. In Libya, you have obviously a real stress test for this policy. There's no question. It's been through a long period of turmoil. Richard talked about that. There are some very interested and concerning regional partners or regional players and global players that are quite interested in Libya. So that, I'm sure, complicates your efforts dramatically. And then I think there's the real question that comes up in these kinds of environments, but particularly has been with Libya, I think, is what's the long-term commitment here going to be? Does it really sustain as much as it should? The specific examples, Anne, you provided are really very encouraging. But again, the question I think occurs is, are they sustainable? And will they be sustained by the U.S. government, by the partners? I've sort of identified, just listening to you, several tensions, I think, that exist in this process that'll be interesting to sort of see how it plays out. First of all, I mean, you've inherited, in a sense, this administration inherited this Global Fragility Act from the previous administration, the previous Congress. And yet, what I'm hearing from you today and what I've heard from this administration, you've taken ownership of it. But nonetheless, it's encouraging, I think, in this policy environment that we operate in Washington to see that here's a policy that was formulated in one administration and has been passed on. Secondly, I think you have the challenge of a standardized, understood, holistic approach to this policy across different countries, but then asking how do you tailor it to each country? And you gave some very good examples in that score. You mentioned, Anne, a few times local partners and voices, and we know how critical that is in this environment. At the same time, you're also convening power of the United States. US government lining up US government agencies, trying to come up with a US government approach. And so again, managing that tension between those two, I can only imagine is challenging. Secondly, fourthly, of the five challenges, the tensions is the long-term approach versus some immediate wins. And you actually pointed to how the immediate wins, some of the things you're seeing, very, very, very impressive to hear. But again, the long-term sustainability will be so important. And then how do you take a holistic approach? That's the essence of the Global Fragility Act, a holistic approach in terms of US government abilities across the 3 Ds, development, defense, and diplomacy. But then how do you work in very specific areas? And again, I think there's an elasticity there that is challenging to manage, but it sounds like you're on it. So thank you very much. I think this has really been a very good discussion so far, and I look forward to the questions we'll have.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to use my moderator role to ask questions, especially since this topic is very personal to me in many ways. So I'm going to open the floor for discussions. We're going to start off with anybody here who has any questions or comments for our panel, and then we will also start taking online questions as well. Please, Andrew. Yes.
We have, well, I just want to say we have microphones here, so because we do have a substantial online audience, so we definitely want to use the microphones. So please raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone to you as quickly as possible.
Any questions in the room? Okay, Andrew, do you have any
Okay,
questions
so we've
online?
got some online. Yes.
Yes.
Oh no.
He had a question.
There we go.
Oh, here we
Go
go.
ahead.
Stanley Cover. I can't help question. If everything we're doing was so right, how did we end up? In 2011, he basically owned it. What happened? We're out in the Middle East. Remember Syria? Obama said, Assad has to go. Where's Assad now? Where's Obama? Shouldn't we have some retrospective look at what we've done, how it worked out, before jumping into new policies?
Any specific speaker?
Wants to-
Please, let's start with you. And then.
I mean, I think you're referring to Libya specifically. If you want, I can start on that.
Please, yes.
You know, I've been intrigued to see as the new administration came in, a number of the senior leaders had actually been around back in 2011 when NATO went into Libya. And there's a certain degree of regret and in retrospect, a certain feeling of, you know, the turmoil that unfolded over the last 10 years was the last thing that the United States was hoping to accomplish. The goal back in 2011 was to prevent, we thought, 250,000 civilians from being slaughtered. And, you know, whatever in retrospect one could say about that, that feeling at the time was very real. Now, it is true that this was followed by a great deal of turmoil. Some of that was because there were no political institutions left. I mean, Gaddafi destroyed anything, and it was very difficult for Libyans to reach agreement with each other. Some of it was a result of ISIS being kicked out of Syria and thinking that and Iraq, and thinking they could land in Libya and create a new caliphate there. And there was some brutal fighting in sort of 2015, 2016 era in Libya around Sirte and Derna. You know, the full story of which I don't think has ever really been told. And it was only in the last maybe 3 years that ISIS was pushed out of Libya. You had the unfortunate effort by Khalifa Haftar to launch an offensive on Tripoli in 2019, which will cost Libya 2 years of progress, at least, in trying to come up with a political agreement. And it also, because Haftar brought in Wagner, it led to intervention by Turkey. So it remilitarized the situation, brought in external actors. So unraveling this now is not easy, but there is a concerted international effort coordinated by the UN to do that. And, you know, I think now there's a serious effort to put the pieces back together. You're asking a very legitimate question. And in a way, it's for the historians to get it figured out. But right now, the focus is on using the opportunity that exists again. Now the fighting has stopped. People understand that the appetite for war is pretty low in Libya. The UN, thanks to a really committed civil servant, like public servant, like Abdoulaye Bathily, is leading a process. And money is coming into the country. You know, unlike so many conflict zones, Libya is a wealthy country. And so I think I'm not just being the typical optimistic diplomat. I think there is a real chance in Libya now. But you're asking a very fair question.
I think the problem is the money coming in. Usually in these kind of fragmented societies and situations, when you have an endless supply of money, that tend to create more problems than less. But any other questions here? Okay, we'll take one more and then I'll come back to you after we take something online, please.
Hi, my name is Rishabh. I'm at the Crane Center for Mass Tragedy Prevention. And my question can be for the entire panel. So how can we better improve our approach to promoting stability while also maintaining the intention of establishing long-term self-sufficiency in Libya and other countries of Haiti?
Please.
Well, that's a very good question. Let me provide an answer that gives in the frame of the U.S. strategy, and then I'll ask my colleagues to fill in to Libya specifically. And I think it's an excellent question. One of the core precepts, one of the core ways that we are approaching this effort, first of all, is to take it over the long term. The plans that we've devised are intentionally 10-year plans. It doesn't mean that we do one thing for 10 years. We will adapt our approach over time as we learn from what we are doing. So long term, with the ability to adapt as we move along. Secondly, we're taking a partnership approach, partnering at all levels. You've heard a little bit about the diplomatic consultations that are underway, and our ambassador and other diplomats in the field are working consistently to build partnerships in key areas. We've talked about how we are focusing on the South, and there are some important opportunities there for partnership as well. And that's an illustration of what we are about here under the strategy. And then finally, I mentioned that we are investing in monitoring, evaluation, and learning over time. This is a long-term undertaking, and we need to caution strategic patience, as in all the work that we do in this area. But I think through that, we will also see that we will evaluate where we have success with partners, where we want to take those successes and potentially scale them. And where we want to pivot and say, this is not really achieving our goals. We want to adjust. So it's really all about providing the capabilities of the population, of the government to move forward on its own.
Richard?
Maybe the one thing I'd say is what I think is hopeful about this new approach is that it is, I think, going to be correctly sized. And by that, I mean, you know, I had some, if we're talking about learning from the lessons of Afghanistan and Iraq, I know when I first went to Afghanistan at the end of 2002, I was posted as a diplomat with a 7-member Army team up in Mazar-i-Sharif doing civil affairs work. And the US sort of decided after a while, well, if one little team with 8 people is doing good work, then multiply that times 3 and it'll do 3 times better work. And then multiply it by 10 and you'll get, you know, exponentially better results. And the next thing you know, you had PRTs with almost 1,000 people on them. And, you know, in retrospect, that didn't do the trick. I think what's interesting about this approach is it is pilot-based, it's targeted. It's trying to use a small amount of resources in a very effective and smart way to, you know, galvanize results rather than trying to, you know, buy results. And so I think in the case of Libya, this is exactly the right environment to test this out and see if it can work. As Anne said, we need to allow ourselves longer than the usual time frame to evaluate this, right? The typical US budget cycle, political cycle, is not maybe the best timeframe to use in trying to get something so challenging, get it right. And so I think 10 years gives us something to work with.
I'm glad you mentioned the budget, because one of the questions I had was, we tend to have our Congress here passing all kinds of stuff without actually backing it up with a budget. And I was wondering how much is the space you've got to use these resources. Andrew, do you have anything?
Yeah, I've got two questions, online questions that I'm going to combine because they're pretty closely related, Libya specific. So the first one is from Maureen Quinn. She asked, why Southern Libya? Very small population in Southern Libya, scattered across large areas. What will be learned that will contribute to addressing the power conflict between the East and West? What about addressing a central issue such as the alarming levels of violence against women and girls? The other question related is from Wad Khan, and he asks, considering that nearly 50% of Libya's population comprises young individuals up to age 24, how can the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability effectively design and implement specific measures or programs to further empower and uplift this demographic in Libya? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah.
wanna start?
Go ahead.
I mean, Anne's office, the Bureau for Conflict and Stability Operations, tasked us out at the Libya External Office, think about how this could work for Libya, where to begin. And we immediately thought of the South. So the question, why Southern Libya? I think it has to do in part, as Anne and I both said earlier, that it is sort of a fulcrum. Libya is divided between East and West. The South is considered, if it's considered at all, it's very marginalized. And if we can use it as the basis now, the pilot project for getting something going here, we think it can have positive impact in the relationship between East and West. There has been progress already in that regard. As Anne mentioned, in Morzuk, serious divisions, tribal divisions, as a result of the fighting in 2019, have been seriously addressed through negotiations brokered by a variety of NGOs, supported by USAID. And why is that important? Because the Libyans are very seized with a national reconciliation project. And part of what we want to do through GFA is support this national reconciliation effort, again, which begins in the South. It's an important project because it not only involves a Libyan-led effort through the Presidential Council to try to, bring people from all sides who, suffered one way or another during the fighting and try to get them together, but it has support from the African Union. Twice in the last year, I've gone to Congo Brazzaville and met with President Sassou Nguesso, who leads the African Union's high-level panel on Libya and was very seized with this reconciliation agenda. So the AU is going to support this. It's important for us to engage all of Libya's neighbors, including African neighbors, including the African Union, to maximize the number of voices trying to move things in the right direction. So reconciliation is a path to broader support from the international community, and GFA and the South are a path to greater support for the reconciliation project. And so for us, it just made a lot of sense to begin with the South, again, because we're not dealing with large resources. It's a targeted budget, and we think it can have the most impact if we get to the South. I'll tell you, if we're able to organize a trip with Anne later this fall, where we fly in with support from DoD, we bring some humanitarian supplies, we meet with people in one of the towns, that would have remarkable impact in the region, and we think have a ripple effect in the country as a whole. On the issue of violence against women, this is a serious problem in Libya, not just in the context of fighting and retribution, but also online hate speech and bullying. I met with the Minister of Women's Affairs in Tripoli last week. She was very seized with this issue. She herself had had some run-ins with the imam in Tripoli, and to her credit, she sat down and met with him for 4 hours and tried to figure out a way to understand each other better. But this is an ongoing issue, and I know a number of our programs are focused on trying to deal with hate speech and things like that.
Dick, thank you very much, and I appreciate your comments and the specific examples. Those are excellent questions, and just to add to what you said in terms of the way that we're approaching the U.S. strategy, not only in Libya but in our other focus countries as well, and our other partner countries, we have a mandate to move forward to advance the Women, Peace, and Security Act. It's written into the law. And so addressing challenges around women and girls is not only the right thing to do in many of these contexts, but we also have a requirement to do that. And I think that you'll see that reflected over a period of time in the work that we're doing, not only in Libya, but in the other partner countries as well. And I think this audience knows well why addressing empowering women and dealing with gender-based violence is and hate speech is so important to the future stability and security of our partner nations, that 50% of the population. In terms of youth, I mentioned, as I mentioned in my remarks, one of the programs that we are focused on is a community-driven program in the south of Libya that does involve youth and a number of other representatives to talk about resource-related issues in these communities, and out of which came the creation of the new oil refinery to provide cooking gas to communities where fuel was previously almost non-existent. And we're committed in the programming that we're doing to continuing to look for ways to give opportunity and to elevate those young voices.
I'm very, very glad to hear about the South, the focus on the South. I think it is potentially the most successful part that you're gonna experience. I think the southern part of Libya, as you all mentioned, is very strategic. It is very ready for a better engagement. I think it is also from the United States interest. It is a great way to protect not only Libya, but also the Sahel. Now we have the Sudan part. I think it is very, very critical. I'm also happy to hear about the reconciliation. And I will urge that you include, even though I spent 30 years as opposition to Gaddafi, but I think you should include the people from the former regime. And I wish that happened 10 years ago. I think we wouldn't have ended up with all of this. I think that also includes Saif al-Islam, Gaddafi. I think that's critical for a lot of these tribes and the supporters of this family in terms of having faith in the process. Without that, I think we're always going to have spoilers inside and outside the game. I skipped you earlier. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Maven and I'm with the HALO Trust. We do humanitarian landmine clearance. We've been working in Libya since 2018. We hire mostly locally and we really try to engage the local living community. So I was wondering if you could talk a little about, in the context of GFA, like engaging the local communities and engaging local NGOs and kind of like a bottom-up approach.
Yeah, I think there's a very simple answer to that question. I can't speak specifically to what HALO Trust is accomplishing, but I certainly know your work around the globe, your excellent work around the globe. We a central component of our approach is to engage local NGOs and local communities, and we have many examples of the ways in which we have done that in developing the plans, dozens and dozens of consultations in different countries around the world. Understanding what those perspectives and those voices is very important to us in developing our approach initially, and then in continuing the work that we're doing going forward. So that's not only about programming, it's also about having a dialogue and engaging in a dialogue to hear those different perspectives. And I think that's one aspect of what we're doing under the U.S. strategy that is novel, and it's intentional. It also is written into the law, and we intend to continue taking an approach where we are engaging a range of actors, not just at a national level, a regional level, among civil society, other kinds of leaders, the private sector, academia, think tanks, because understanding what those voices tell us is really going to be critical to our success going forward.
Richard, any
I,
comments?
I would just echo that Halo Trust has done great work in Libya. I think we funded some of it for a time. I'm not sure exactly where we are on that now, but you know, particularly in the wake of the offensive against Tripoli and with the involvement of Wagner, it turned out there were all kinds of booby traps and things left in children's toys. And, you know, Halo did some very important and dangerous work in trying to clear that up. So hats off to you.
Andrew Lips, I have, we don't have a lot of time. I know you have to leave around 11. So how about if we take a couple of questions from online and then maybe one here or two. And then I would like to ask you, Anne and Richard, since a large audience actually is watching you from Tripoli and Benghazi and throughout Libya, to address them directly about this policy and what it means to them. And I think Richard also can say a few things on that. Please.
Okay,
Andrew.
thank you. Just online, I've got a couple of questions related to elections. Really, you mentioned, Richard, the importance of that, but the questions, two of the questions really are focused on what's the alternative if there are no elections. What would we do as a result? What's our policy going to be? And to make sure no one's sort of standing in the way of letting that go forward for elections. Secondly, the question, there's a couple of questions focused on sort of the regional focus, in a sense, looking at the conflict in Western Sahara and what are the conflict dynamics there? How do they impact Libya and the US approach there? And then sort of related to that, I think would be, could you tell us more about the current Turkish and Russian involvement in Libya? Are they withdrawing, remaining, recommitting, and are they of concern to the policy? So first on elections, secondly, on the regional piece.
Okay. But well, on the first question, you know, an alternative to election, there is no alternative to elections. There have to be elections in order to reunify the country and re-legitimize the institutions. The question is, how can you structure those elections so that they happen peacefully, they don't stimulate greater violence? The real question is, when can you have elections? And that's what the SRSG Batili is focused on through some very intensive shuttle diplomacy that he's going to be launching soon. You know, the goal is that the key actors with support from key elements of the public agree on, you know, who's going to lead the country to elections so that the government that's running things levels the playing field for a fair election. How are you going to get everybody to agree to accept the results, even if they don't like Saif al-Islam, or they don't like Haftar, or they don't like Dabaiba, or any of the other candidates? And then how do you set the date so that you can work back from there and put everything in place? There needs to be a credible roadmap for elections, and we will never stop talking about that. So there is no alternative to elections, but we learned from 2021, it's not enough to just set a date and leave it there. So that's going to be an ongoing process. On the regional aspects, I'm intrigued that somebody mentioned Western Sahara. It is not directly linked to Libya, but it is true that both Morocco and Algeria are interested in what's going on in Libya and play a role. Morocco has hosted some of the talks between different elements in the Libyan equation, several rounds of talks, including a round that recently ended up with partial agreement towards a law for elections that would, you know, govern who can run and so forth. So Morocco's done some good work on that. Algeria has hosted, they're very focused on the tribal dimension of the situation in Libya. They're very focused in a balanced, stable outcome to what's going on in Libya. So even though Algeria and Morocco have a lot of issues with each other over Western Sahara, on Libya, they've been trying to contribute to a stable outcome. There was a question about Turkey and Russia. You know, the Turkish intervention, the impact of it was to stop the fighting and allow a political process to unfold, which resulted in a ceasefire in October of 2020, which still holds today, and the political talks that the UN has been able to lead. But I think most Libyans want foreign forces, whether it's Wagner or Turkey or others, to depart, and for Libya to be able to make its own bilateral security cooperation arrangements with a range of partners. And that's part of the agenda under these UN-led talks, which have a security dimension. there's this so-called 5+5 committee of generals from the West and the East who work on trying to come up with a formula whereby Libya could reunify its military and then ask all these foreign forces to leave. So, and it's also interesting with Turkey to note that there's been lately some renewed indications of engagement between Turkey and Egypt, which are both of these very key players on the Libyan equation. And if Turkey and Egypt can find sort of a common language on Libya, that would bode well for the political process.
Any thoughts on this, or should we move forward? I'm going to have to debate Richard in private about the election and the zero-sum game that involves the presidential election and how to go about it, especially since Libyans have not decided whether they want a presidential election to start with. But anyway, please, let's close up with you and Richard talking specifically to the relatively large audience that's following this from Libya itself.
Well, I feel I had a chance to talk to Libyan audiences last week when I was in Tripoli, and the visit got some.
This is also includes all of the experts on Libya, both in Europe and also in the United States.
I think the main message is that the United States remains committed to trying to help Libyans overcome a decade of transition, to consolidate the gains that they've made. It is important for Libyan leaders to understand their public is expecting them to compromise and find a way forward here, and we're lending our voice to that effort. And the Global Fragility Act is just one more way for the United States to signal its commitment to Libya for the long haul. We're gonna continue, but we're anything we do, we want to be more stabilizing than destabilizing. And we're also very conscious that when we get too involved, we get accused of being imperialists or colonialists or neo-colonialists. And so this has to be a Libyan-led process, and we will reinforce those voices of common sense and compromise that we know exist in Libya, and help them try to succeed and have an impact on the leadership who are making the decisions about whether elections can unfold peacefully.
And I think they would like to hear from you directly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about today what we are doing and the results of what we have done so far and what we hope to see in the future under this approach. I would only add to what's already been said that the framework in which we are working in Libya, for Libya, and in other parts of the world under the U.S. strategy has features that you've heard us discuss today, and that we will continue to elaborate upon and to pursue as we go forward. One is this long-term approach. Very important to us to set long-term goals and to adapt as we go. The second is the consultative approach to engage a wide range of actors, as we have already in Libya, government, non-government, private sector, who, by the way, as we went through the consultations, underscored to us the importance of these longer-term efforts and in incorporating some of the really complex sensitivities that we are doing in the context of Libya. And then I think the third part of what I wanted to say is that we will put in place, consistent with what we are able to do, an evaluation and a learning mechanism, which I think represents very much a result of the lessons that we learned over the years in other contexts, that we have to understand what we are doing, whether what we are doing is beneficial, and how we can move forward. And then finally, what we've described here today is an undertaking that bolsters U.S. government policy and our long-term goals for Libya. And I think it is a framework that, as the ambassador has identified, works very well. And we look forward to the partnership of those who are online. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to continuing the intensive work to make this a success. Thank you
very much.
Yeah.
We're going to close in a few minutes. So Andrew, do you have any final closing remarks? And then I'll close the session after you.
No, I just want to thank both of you for coming here today to share this with us. I think this is a very important conversation for us to be having in Washington. We've talked a lot. The Global Fragility Act has been really something that I think a specialized group of people in this city and elsewhere in the world have paid attention to. What I think you've demonstrated today is the wider interest for foreign policy professionals, for people who follow the U.S. role in the world. You really identified, I think, the importance of this to U.S. national interests, and appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As always, the policy is always great. The issue is always about how to go about it. The how is always what actually where the United States tends to end up tripping, not the intention, not the policy. Anyway, I want to thank you very, very much. And it's really a great opportunity, and I'm grateful for your time. I know how busy you are. And I would suggest more engagement like this, especially in Libya. And I hope you actually go there. That would be great to hear from them directly. I will encourage, especially the experts online, which I've always been encouraging, that they should give you feedback, because I think one of the untapped resources is the number of experts and think tanks in Washington next to the State Department and in Europe who have been following Libya for a long time. And I think they have enormous amount of knowledge, including former US officials, that they can help with. Richard, thank you very much for your service. I know you're now transitioning from an ambassador to just a special envoy, and I hope next ones will actually build on what you've been doing rather than start from scratch, as sometimes happens. Andrew, I am so grateful for your kindness of joining us and for hosting us here. For all of you, I'm going to make a small pitch for SAIS. SAIS is moving to a new building with better facilities. That's why our really friends here were able to host us, because we couldn't accommodate an event like this. Since we are really moving from Mass Avenue, where everybody knows us, to the old museum building. We will start there in August, and our first cohort of students, and that will start the next semester there. And we're going to have a lot of very good facilities for conferences, for events. And I hope the next time I'll be able to host you there to the new. And Richard, please don't forget your alma mater. Come to SAIS, and we really need people to join us as then resident fellows after they retire. We've done that with Stephanie Williams, and I hope maybe you can do the same. Thank you all very, very much. I'm really grateful for you coming here, and I'm very grateful for those who are following us online. The video of this event will be posted soon, so those who have not seen it can do so. And I finally thank you for the people who have really done an incredible job to make this happen. Judy from the State Department, thank you very much for your hard work, and others with you. Lana from SAIS, you have been absolutely incredible. And our colleagues in Stimson, both interns and staff. I know we dumped this on you in the last minute, but I am extremely grateful to all of you for doing this. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Great job.